This game was played in the last round of a Swiss event, and both me and my opponent were somewhat behind the leaders. But if either one of us won, then that the player would have a chance to maybe tie for some prize. So and a draw wouldn't give anybody any hope for any prize. So the opening was the French defense, and I played knight gf3, which is a fairly fashionable line, but not the main line. The main line is knight to e2. Here black has a variety of moves. He can play c takes d4, he can play f6, he can play queen d6. He chose g6, which is a bit of a rarer line, and that caught me somewhat by surprise, but not quite. And yet here I wasn't sure if rook e1 was the best, but it's the most reasonable move. Here again I couldn't decide if I can take on c5 or if I can play bishop b5. In the end, knight f1 is the most reasonable. Exchanged on d4, and now he played a bit of an odd move. But the idea is that black wants to activate the bishop, and he wants to play f6 so that the bishop would then start to put pressure on my pawn in the center. But for that he first has to guard the e-pawn. So that gives me a bit of time to develop my pieces. b3 so that the bishop can come out. f6, and now the pressure is there, so I have to defend. Defending d4, b6, that develops the second bishop, even though it's going to be somewhat passive. See how the tempo. And here I thought I got a bit of initiative, because it seems like my knights could be coming to some aggressive squares, but it turned out that there's actually not that much of an initiative, and my opponent calmly defends against it. Now he plays queen 7 so that in case I give a check to h6, he can go king h8, and then f7 is covered. That's one of the reasons for playing queen e7. But of course it just makes the queen slightly better. Bishop b1. I really am not sure what to do. And for the next few moves, we both are kind of patiently going back and forth, hoping for the opponent to screw up. And then for the next few moves, I'd say that my opponent kind of outplayed me. First, the pair of knights comes off the board, and then h3 was a bit of a weakening move, because after rook c1, here it turned out that I can't really play f3, because then this knight would just come to g3, which I had just weakened for my opponent's convenience. So I had to suck it up and retreat, defending f2 by blocking the pressure on the f file. And it seems that white has the white should have played against the weakness on e6, but it turns out that actually black is very solidly placed, and it's not good for me to take on e4, because that would just give him the advantage of two bishops. And my pawn on d4 is as much a weakness as the pawn on e6. And yet I'd say here the game is fairly balanced. But of course none of us wants to offer a draw. So we're just playing waiting moves. Bishop d3 coming back, and controlling the diagonal again. Another waiting move, queen to e7. Now he makes sure that I can't come to b5 with the bishop. But that turned out to be weakening the other diagonal, and this gave me time to play bishop e3. If he tries to play bishop f8 and contest the diagonal, this will actually give me what I want, because this is my bad bishop, this is his good bishop, so I really want to trade off that pair of bishops. So for strategic reasons my opponent does not want that. So he played rook c8, trying to contest the c-file, and that leaves his pieces in a bit of a loose position, because his rook can be captured by me at any time, but also the queen has to kind of stick around that rook defending it. So knight e5, he had to keep guarding the rook, and then capture, and he took with the queen, which seems reasonable since the pawn is still protected. He's now controlling the c-file, and if I played something like queen c1, the game would probably end as a draw. But here I spotted that the king is a little bit weak here, and I can try to put some pressure on this king. So I can play queen f4. Now the threat is queen f7. That doesn't win anything directly, but it's pretty annoying. And my opponent, of course, decided to guard f7. The trick is that if he goes queen c7, a natural move, then I can maybe play knight g6, and that hangs. That leaves the queen hanging here, but it actually wasn't anything special because my d-pawn also hangs. And my opponent had a bit more time here on the clock, and he decided to maybe play quickly and keep the game complicated and not allow simplification with moves like knight to g6. So he played queen e8, and that seemed all natural. It's guarding f7, but the queen now has to be guarding f7, because if I come to f7 with the queen, then the bishop on b7 would fall, for one thing. And realizing that f7 is so weak, I found a nice tactical opportunity. So I played bishop b5, and it's interesting that the move ended up winning the game, but there was actually a brilliant counter defense to that. So try to think for a few seconds and see if you can spot the defense against bishop b5, and maybe think about what's the idea of bishop b5 in the first place. Well, which is obviously distracting the black queen from f7. So I played bishop b5, and here my opponent realized perhaps that he cannot take on b5 because of check, and now there's not capture on b7, but instead there's a very strong bishop f8, which wins the game on the spot because black is going to be checkmated. Bishop takes f8, queen f8, checkmate. He doesn't have any checks here around the king side. No checks, and that allows me to play moves like this. And if he takes on e5, then I just take back, and next move is checkmate. So he cannot take on b5. In the game he played bishop takes e5, which also didn't work out too well. But it turned out that there was a brilliant move, knight to c3. Knight to c3, and the idea is that, of course, if I take, well, then he gives a check and he wins my queen back, and he saves himself that way, without losing material and without getting checkmated. And it turns out that I don't really have any convenient response to knight c3 other than just retreating and keeping the game like this in some complicated variations. He can't take on a2 because of queen d2, but still, it would have been a game. I guess here my opponent was upset that suddenly I'm creating threats, and he took on e5. And it turns out that it's okay, and I can keep the bishop hanging, even though my knight on e5 is gone now. It turns out that the bishop is just as powerful, and again, he cannot take. If he takes, well, then there's queen b8 and checkmate. So this is in part the point of the combination. In the game he played queen f7, which was probably losing, and this allows me to completely tie up the black pieces. Check, and now f3, so that f2 doesn't get captured, and it turns out that here I can just start to grab his pawns, and because I have two bishops and black has no counterplay, it turns out that this position is very easily winning for white. So knight h5, and here the last move that really wraps up the game. After bishop d2, the bishop is coming to e5, the queen cannot come to f4, and there's no perpetual check against this king, So the game is basically decided. I'm just gonna grab all his pawns, and then I'm gonna start to advance the pawns on the queenside. And the game ended very soon. In this position, my opponent resigned.